Welcome. This is Weird West Radio. I am Michael, your host, and in this episode, we are returning back to our roots yet again to discuss the 2023 Weird Western Oregon Trail. Oregon Trail, with a running time of 112 minutes, is a 2023 American horror-ish Western film directed by Michael Patrick Jan and starring Zoe DeGrand Mason, Mather Zickel, and Lisa Lo Cicero. Set in the 1870s on the Oregon Trail, the story follows Abigail Archer as she attempts to retrieve her family's horse while fighting against the outlaws that killed her parents and brother. That synopsis seems to only encompass the last 40 minutes.
40 minutes of the yes. That synopsis basically is very misleading, Mike.
Like much of this movie, David, they pulled an exploitation film style marketing routine in a lot of ways. And we will get into that. I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by that. So the official synopsis: a young Abigail Archer, alone in the Montana winter during the 1870s, fights for her survival to retrieve her one earthly possession, a family horse, from a gang of bloodthirsty bandits. If you're new to the podcast, you can find most of our past episodes, as well as our future, wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search Weird West Radio, Apple Podcast, and Spotify users. Please be sure to leave us a review and rate the podcast. All right, David, so expectations are the real culprit here.
Yes. Yeah.
While I typically avoid letting preconceptions that's pretty much my religion when it comes to this network. Don't let your expectations dictate how you review a film.
Yeah.
And also, same thing, preconceptions. Just throw them out the window. However, that became very hard with this particular film because when a movie is marketed so explicitly as horror,
yeah,
as the distributor and production company set out to frame this as a horror film, they missed the opportunity to more accurately represent its true genre focus.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, the title Oregon Trail is a classic example of something you call, I believe the terminology is pun title.
Yes.
Blending historical references with genre indicators. Now, it riffs the name on the Oregon Trail, the 19th century westward expansion. And there might be some confusion because you guys can't see the title. You're hearing me say it, but you're linking the historical frontier journey with organs. Like bodily organs.
Body organs.
So the name of the movie is not Oregon Trail. It's Bodily Organ Trail. So
yes.
Not bodily, but it's organs, the human organs.
Yes.
Okay, and it's a visceral nod, so the creators say, to body horror and gore, aligning with the typical horror conventions. Now, these pun-based titles, which merge familiar cultural elements with a genre twist, are popular in horror and dark comedies because they establish tone and genre at a glance, which ultimately gives audiences an immediate sense of what to expect. You know, the film's unique angle. In this case, I don't feel like any of it really paid off when it comes to the pun, the attempt to create a Weird West that also tries to riff on the horror film.
Yeah.
That said, I'm not sure I'd classify this purely as horror. It's a commendable effort within the Western form. Writer Meg Turner, I believe, was the screenwriter. She did effectively tap into the structuralist theme of man against the wilderness.
Yes.
Which is a foundational concept in Westerns that we have now talked about numerous times. And it was an idea floated by Andre Bazin as well as Jim Kitses. This archetype frequently acts as a vehicle for broader reflections on human identity, progress, and existential struggle. And of course, I'm speaking of the structuralist theme of man against the wilderness and the elements that the wilderness genre often use to interrogate cultural anxieties and philosophical questions. That's what that whole structuralist foundational concept is about. And in that way, Meg Turner, as well as the director of this film, Michael Patrick Jan, they were successful.
Yeah.
They were successful in that regard. Ultimately, while this film succeeds as an effective Western, engaging with many of the genre's conventional functions, it does fall short of horror.
Yes. That is where I really am kind of again hard on this film from the get-go, is because like after I watched the film, did it do a amendable job as a Western? Yeah, it showed it did a great job showing the setting, doing that type of, you know, manifest destiny type of story where it's about this family getting through the trials and tribulations of taking the quote unquote Oregon Trail, or the trail to the west. Okay. But once you put the horror genre in there, there is an expectation, in my opinion, that has to come into play when you're playing in that genre.
Yeah.
Did they do a good job trying to up the brutality level? That was the thing that I was left with at the end of the film, because I'm like going, there were moments when I was like, okay, you could have been really brutal there, because this type of genre that I know that they were trying to tap into horror wise dictates that you have to do a brutal storytelling, much like, say, like I Spit on Your Grave.
Yeah. At its best, this movie is a Western thriller punctuated by moments of, I guess you could say, intense violence.
Yeah.
But lacking the sustained horror elements needed to fully claim that it's a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
It just, I don't feel like it can claim that it's a horror film.
A really great example of this is when I was doing more research on this film, and I was seeing what people were talking about this film and what other people were like saying, especially in the horror genre. One of the scenes that basically we were saying, oh, it's so brutal, this is what makes it a horror film, was the scene where the guy gets shot in the balls. And it's kind of like, that's not, watch it.
It happens in a lot of movies.
It happens in a lot of movies
films.
that aren't horror films. And I'm like going, no, is that a brutal scene? Sure. But is it horror levels of brutal?
The movie Brimstone, which we're going to probably call upon several times throughout this movie discussion, because I feel like that's a better version of what we got here. Brimstone, I would never even consider a horror. It's a Weird West, but I wouldn't even consider that a horror film, and that has way more gruesome graphic violence.
Yeah.
Just because you have gruesome graphic violence that you put into your film, it doesn't make it a horror film. There are specific genre conventions that must be utilized in order for this to be a horror film, and I don't feel like having a family that gets massacred by a few road agents
constitutes.
I don't think it constitutes a horror. That's exactly what I was going to say. It just does not feel truly authentic. And sure, if you study genre theory, genres are continually pushing past those boundaries that they create themselves. They're not fixed. They're fluid. So there's always room to bend and change. But there are agreed archetypes, iconography, semantics that should be implemented within the horror film in order for us to believe the horror syntax. Like if it's not there, then it's not a horror film.
You can bend the rules of genre. You can't break them. That's the thing, is like when you look at like dabbling as a filmmaker in genres, you have to understand that there are touchstones rules about any genre that you jump into. If I decide to actually jump into a drama, but I'm going to make comedic elements into it, some of those rules and some of those storytelling beats I might choose might ruin the fact of my drama and turn it into a comedy.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's horror films that show no violence, and they are far more horror. Look at Val Lewton's famous horror cycle, which were all suggestive horror. He's really the one that started the cat scare, which literally relies on nothing being there.
Yes.
To instill fear by nothing through a cat, essentially.
Because our imagination as humans can come up with something much more scarier.
Right. So if if violence were to be the variable that generates an authentic horror film, well, then what about Val Lewton's Cycle? What about the countless other horror films that are, without a doubt, horror that don't rely on the grotesque and the bloody to call itself horror? So in that regard, or looking at it from that point of view, just because you have a few choice grim scenes, which, by the way, there really aren't that many grim scenes.
No, there isn't.
To me, this feels less violent than Kevin Costner's last Western film, which had far more disturbing violence.
Disturbing violence,
and that was nothing. It does feel, David, that we're coming out the box swinging and taking shots at this movie rather quickly. We're 11 minutes in, and it feels like we're just going to shit all over this. But that's not the case. The movie managed to do several things appropriately.
Yeah.
So taking a step back from what this film was marketed as and looking at what it is, the product presented is one where director Michael Patrick Jan, as well as screenplay or screenwriter Meg Turner, took active measures to do more with this film than simply a paint-by-numbers approach to Western horror or Weird West cinema. And what I mean by that is the observant viewer will probably notice that there is attention to detail in its production. I got the sense that this team wanted to do more with this feature than just make it another run-of-the-mill Western horror.
Yeah.
This is particularly notable in the cinematography, which emphasizes the expansive, unforgiving landscapes and haunting visual compositions that reflect the genre's thematic tension between civilization and wilderness, as we had mentioned. So you have an attention to detail, and not just with cinematography, production design. The musical score was appropriately subtle. There were a lot of great things about this movie. None of it had to do with the horror, though.
Yeah. And that was the thing, I think.
It makes me wonder, David, do you think that this movie might have shot itself in the foot? What if this movie marketed itself as simply just a Western suspense?
See, I think that would have garnered better attention.
Yes.
And the right audience, because you have to actually ask yourself.
I think a Western audience would have liked this movie far better than a horror audience.
No, absolutely. Because like when you look at how it was received, everyone gave it middling attention.
Yeah.
Because half of its audience probably was like, oh, this is a good Western. They're coming in as a Western audience. But the other people are like going, no, we came in here because you decided to advertise yourself as a horror Western, where in today's world, there are some excellent horror Western films like Bone
David,
Tomahawk.
are you saying horror or horror Western? Because
horror.
Both sound good. Both sound good to me.
But that's the thing. And especially like nowadays, there is a bar being set for this type of genre where you take the two genres together. And so many filmmakers now are dabbling into this genre where they're like, oh, there's a lot of potential here.
Yeah.
And it seems like this one decided to just basically jump into the genre without really asking themselves, are we actually part of that genre?
To me, it seems like Michael Patrick Jan, I'm not sure who the person, I think it was Meg Turner who actually initiated this project. So let's just use her as our go-to figurehead. It seems like Meg Turner was more about making a Western. And I'm wondering if the producers of this film, which I believe the distributor ended up being Paramount Plus, I'm wondering if they are the ones who wanted this to be a horror and Meg Turner had simply written a Western.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, because just in my experience, I have seen so many projects basically, for some strange reason, they have to be sold a certain way for distribution or for
Right.
streaming purposes nowadays, that people are like saying, the only way for my film to be seen is if I tell people it's this when it's not.
Yeah, there's different markets, different distributors that look for different projects, and there are specifics that need to be checked off a list before they agree to distribute something, produce it, throw money at it. They need to make sure there's a market for it within their infrastructure.
Down to even like the titles of the film, because like the one thing that I wanted to mention when you were mentioning earlier, just in the beginning of the show, how even your title can be changed in the middle of production, because like some bigwig up top basically sends a message down the pipeline and says, "Hey, we got to actually not call the film this. We have to call it this because we have to sell it to the distributor."
Yeah, David, that's
because that's happened to me
happens a lot,
in a couple projects that I've been to. And even like one of the projects that I even been on, and actually one of the projects I actually got distributed, it originally had a title that was originally created by the writers and the director that I was working with, and then the distributor came back and say that title doesn't work for us. You have to change it. And then they came back with a title that had nothing to do with us, and they changed it to Scream Machine because it fit what they wanted.
Yeah,
and it was like, because we had this whole. We even had like a band come up with a theme that had our title in it, and we had it all edited out. They sent it back and said, no, you can't use that title. You got to change it to Scream Machine. And we're like going, but our theme song says this. Mm-hmm. And they're like going, no, we don't care. You have to do this because this is the only way we're going to promote it.
This is how it's going to get marketed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. And we know anybody that has studied film history would quickly notice that this has happened a lot, especially if you look at, let's pick, I think the most recognizable decade for those types of actions and behaviors from studios, the 60s and 70s.
Oh, yeah.
Predominantly the 70s. The exploitation film era where it was only about earning that quick buck. And sometimes it had nothing to do with the actual script or the actors. They would just simply put together a snazzy poster, change or tinker with the title until they found something that would work within their distribution platforms, their distribution pipeline that they have. It happens all the time. It's the reason why you would go, in fact, not go, even today, if you go try to rent a movie from the 70s and you see this excellent looking movie poster, like, oh my God, this poster looks awesome. And then you realize there's not one single thing from that poster that's actually in the movie itself.
Well,
so these things are common. It does happen.
Well, think about it, Mike, for our audience, that for them to understand, think about like in our genre that we talked to about in this show, spaghetti westerns are infamous for.
Yes.
They would actually, back in the day, just want to throw the name Django into the title.
Yep. Even if the title
had nothing to do with
even if the movie had nothing to do with a Django.
I mean,
they would, in fact, dude, they did it with the character names in the credit sequences.
Yeah.
Like the character is, let's say the character's name is Sabata. And then for some reason, the second movie, they call him Indio Black.
Indio Black. And it's like that. Those are the things that basically are seen in the back then, and they still continue up to this day. They're just more like covered up.
It's
I guess
less
you could say.
exploitive and less in your face. They try to hide it. It's no longer like a little charming gimmick any longer. I think the jig is up, so people do have to be a little more coy with those types of strategies. So when it comes to character development, ultimately it leaves you completely wanting. It takes a considerable amount of time to form a meaningful connection with our protagonist, Abigail. Not because the actress wasn't good. Mason, I believe is her name. Let me get her name.
Yeah, let's get her name right.
Zoe DeGrand Mason, I believe is how you pronounce her name. She was great. As a performer, not a single problem. It had to do with the writing or possibly the directing. her character just wasn't really present for the first half of the movie, or for the first quarter of the movie. And to find out that she really is the character that we should be watching, there is a disconnect there. And even when she does take front and center, when she becomes a foreground player, you still don't really quite fully understand what she's about until the movie is almost over.
Yeah. You don't really get, what's the word? She's not believable. Her character, not the actor.
Yeah.
The character itself, because the way the character was treated, where quite honestly, the other characters around Abigail are more compelling than Abigail.
And again, it's interesting you say that, because I would agree, David. And the reason why it's so bizarre is because Zoe DeGrand Mason is actually the better actor.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The things that she does get to do, she does them very well.
She does them very well.
But unfortunately, the other characters seem to be privileged when it comes to fleshing them out. Now, I'm not saying any of them are standout characters. The most famous actor is probably Sam Trammell, who played Logan, the lead douchebag of the Bandits. Just a really bad, horrible person. Sam Trammell is known, I think his claim to fame, what he's most known for is Sam in True Blood.
True Blood.
So while it's clear from the outset who the protagonist is, there is an elusiveness to Abigail's character that just prevents her from fully materializing until, as I said, nearly the end of the film. And as a result, her development feels incomplete, keeps the audience at a distance, and there are so many missed opportunities for emotional investment.
Especially since we're supposed to right away care for Abigail because her family is entirely slaughtered.
It should have been from her perspective from the very beginning, and maybe that was the writing strategy to misdirect us so that we think we're watching the story of the son. It seemed like it was going to be more about her brother, the character's brother. And then when he gets an arrow through his throat, you're like, well, I guess he's done.
And that's what I mean is like, it feels
the
like
misdirection misdirected so much that it took us almost the entire movie to catch back up.
Yeah, it takes your audience out.
Yeah.
And that's
sometimes misdirection, David, works great, but in this specific occasion, the misdirection, we never found the direction.
We never found the direction because like
we were so misdirected, we never even regained our footing.
Even if the writer and the director came back and say the point was the misdirect to believe that the son was, or the brother was supposed to be the focus, that's kind of hard to take because like even with the brother you didn't really dive fully into him as well. So it's kind of like your main focus were the criminals, was that band, the cannibal wannabe people.
I was frustrated. It's funny that you say that. I want to get back to that. It was just frustrating ultimately because the opening of the film, I do feel like it was engrossing. The opening 15 minutes, I was interested in the movie. I had figured there are some members in this family that were probably going to die, especially since this movie was marketed as a horror. So I expected it.
Yeah.
But the people that died, I didn't expect to die. And I feel like my emotional investment was already thrown in with them.
Yeah.
And when it was revealed that they were killed, it was hard for me to reorient myself to finding someone new to follow along with. And I think ultimately, and I pretty much said just as much a few moments ago, but I just wanted to try to kind of drive home that point. I've never quite watched a movie like this before where they try to misdirect, and in doing so, you lose sight of who our actual character is.
Well, I think also the tough part was, now, to me, the death of the family in the very beginning was kind of lackluster because it almost felt like it was just like a blink of an eye and you miss it.
Yeah.
Where it was just like, to me,
it just wasn't enough. That's why I'm saying I was frustrated with it, and for probably reasons that I just said, and also reasons that you're getting into.
Mm-hmm. Because like in order to get invested, especially in a horror movie, if you want your audience to get invested, you have to let the audience be able to feel for the victims. That's the reason why we love slasher films. We either cheer or we feel bad when the victim gets killed, caught by Jason in the end. Here, it was like a blink if you miss it when the family dies and they cut to all of a sudden they just see them all slaughtered.
There was no struggle. Okay. If anything, if they wanted to ratchet up the violence or the horror element, we should never have seen the faces of the killers. It should have been just shadows or silhouettes that you see through the wagon canvas.
Yes.
You then see this brutal struggle where you never can quite make heads or tail of the subject that's attacking our characters.
Yeah.
And then it ends in a bloody mess. That's how it ended, but there was no mystery. We knew who killed the family. Them. It was over in a matter of seconds. There was no struggle. So you're right, David. That was another aspect that was just... And it seems like the theme here is just missed opportunities.
Missed opportunities, yeah. And not really understanding your genre. Because if this was... What I'm talking about for these expectations, I'm talking from a horror fan.
Yes.
Where, like, if you were just saying to me, we're just watching a Western, here it is, that beginning would have actually felt, oh, okay, that makes sense.
I probably would have been shrugged and said, okay.
Yeah, I would have like, okay. It's kind of lackluster, it's sudden, but it doesn't bother my brain as a moviegoer. But when, as a horror fan, I'm expecting, okay, give me some brutal stuff. Give me... As funny as it sounds, give me someone's head lopped off.
Yeah. No, listen, I'm not a violent enthusiast. Like, you know this. Like, I'm not into gore. I feel like if it's needed for your story, then by all means, gore it up. If you feel like it's vital to your narrative. So I'm not some bloodthirsty horror enthusiast that's demanding more violence. I am just surprised that this movie is supposed to be a horror and they do all of the horror things the wrong way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All of it. It's almost as if the writer and the director actually know nothing about the horror genre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I left with it, and that's why my score was really when we get to it in the end is really tough on it, because I'm like going, I went into this thinking one way, but you gave me something else.
Yeah. The ending was the most problematic aspect for me. While I enjoyed the movie for what it was, it being a Western, not a horror, Abigail, aided by a few random allies, she defeats the murderous road agents and thieves. However, just as the film reaches its climax, one of the more repugnant villains, after being burned alive, unexpectedly returns to enact a form of demonic vengeance. This is the producer, writer, director's attempt at the horror.
Yes.
And it fails utterly.
That thing that you mentioned earlier about the film tries to be a horror by saying, oh, look, we're going to do this.
Yes. So I use the term demonic loosely because the film is grounded in a reality similar to ours. It lacks any overt elements of the occult, which does in fact seem to contrast with the filmmaker's intentions. So instead, they appear to play with the trope of the archetypal villain, one who can withstand brutal violence to seek revenge against our protagonist in the film's final moments. So when I say the trope of the archetypal villain, I'm talking about the horror archetypal villain.
Yeah.
The Michael Myers.
Yeah.
The Jason, the character that cannot be killed because of some type of demonic possession, some supernatural mystical power that has some type of control over their person.
Some psychic, psyche, or like some internal wrath. That fuels the character.
Yeah. So they turn not even the lead villain, mind you, which would make more sense. They turn a side villain into this demonic entity.
Yes.
And again, I'm using that as an adjective
because it's
He's
not a supernatural.
Correct. But I'm trying to show you that they tried to use that archetype, the demonic archetype that we're all familiar with, but that are actually very common in slasher films specifically.
Oh, yeah.
The narrative choice undermines the tension, though, built throughout the film, as it introduces an almost supernatural resilience that feels out of place within the established reality of the story. So now you have incoherence. You're trying to throw in a demonic archetype into something that you're trying to force to be a horror.
Yes.
When in all actuality, this is not a horror, this is a Western. So when the movie couldn't get any worse, or at least we had assumed, suddenly it turns into something fucking bizarre.
Yes, because that's the thing is like, this is the point of the movie where I basically felt, okay, they're really trying to shoehorn in, we are a horror movie.
Hey guys, this is why I said, David, that I'm wondering if maybe this movie was written originally as just a Western, and then Meg Turner got a phone call. Hey, do you have a horror film that you have written? We're looking to produce a horror film.
Oh, I could change my script.
Well, I can just do a quick rewrite and change some things around to kind of fit the horror genre. That's what this feels like. This feels like piecework.
And
doesn't
it's a
it
rush
kind of
job. It's a definite rush
piecemeal
job.
work. That's what I was trying to say. A rush job. Yeah.
Because like the thing is like, could a person could have taken a step back and taken a horror or like a Western story like this and added horror elements to it? Absolutely. But the problem here is you have to give those horror elements some time to mesh into your story, because when you get to this point and you do this, all it seems is like, oh, I'm just going to shoehorn it in. Because the way I felt about it is, why does this side character get turned into the Jason Voorhees and not your main villain?
Yeah.
Your main villain should be turned into the Jason Voorhees. Okay, do him, especially since you've established how evil and brutal he is. Okay,
It just you listen. Again, this is a reality that's similar to ours. It's grounded. So when you have a character that was burned alive, that then digs himself out of the ash, his own ash, mind you.
Think of that.
He gets on a horse, rides countless miles to someone's home that he heard someone talking about.
Yes.
Somehow he manages to find the location in the middle of the wilderness where anybody could live.
Brutalizes the two people.
And he shows up with his skin burnt. It just is a very weird scene that goes against pretty much every narrative cue throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Now, a good comparison to show, or a contrast of a film that does this type of thing right, that's also a weird West, is Brimstone. Marin Koolhoven directed a movie about 6 years ago with Dakota Fanning and Guy Pearce.
Yeah.
And the movie is a Western, okay? Until the last 10 minutes, and you're like, I don't want to spoil this, because if you haven't seen it, you have to watch it.
It's a good
It is
Western.
one of my favorite contemporary Westerns. Contemporary meaning it was produced, shot, distributed just a few short years ago. But it is a period piece. You don't realize what you're watching until the last 10, 15 minutes. And it's one of those moments, Dave, where your mouth drops because you realize that they've been telling you this the whole time. That's how you know you're doing a movie right, specifically a horror, is when they give you that reveal at the end that shocks you, and you're not thinking, well, how does that work? That makes no sense. Instead, this ending makes perfect sense, not because they spoon-fed you, but because they dropped those narrative plants throughout.
They
gave you those cues so that when it was revealed, it wasn't a shock other than the fact that you didn't see it coming. And once that shock was over, that initial shock, you shook your head and said, yeah, I get this, and I buy it. This movie didn't do that. It didn't want to do the work in order to make something like this ending with this burnt victim, well, maybe not a victim, this burnt villain.
Yeah.
If you want this burnt villain to come back from the dead, then you have to set it up way early.
Yeah, if you want to create the Jason Voorhees or the Michael Myers archetype.
I'm saying come back from the dead. He obviously wasn't dead.
He wasn't
but
dead.
That's the trope they were playing with.
But
though.
when you're playing the unstoppable
there
monster,
you go. Yes, the
that
unstoppable
just keeps,
monster.
the unstoppable monster that keeps coming back, no matter how many times you shoot him, no matter how many times you stab him, he just gets up slowly and then keeps coming after you. When you're dealing with an archetype like that, you do have to have those narrative beats, like what you said, where you establish that in the character. And that's the problem with the reveal, is because you didn't establish, oh, this side character is a badass. Like, he's been stabbed probably multiple times. He's constantly gotten up. Stuff like that, where he's unstoppable. It just comes out of nowhere. Yeah. It's like this normal guy, suddenly divine intervention came in and basically, just like you said, some demonic force filled him and possessed him to rise from the dead.
And remind me, David, we saw him get up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, see, that's another mistake. Yeah. You know what would have worked better? Is if we just saw him in the house.
Yeah.
The three characters who survive, they go back to that house, and when they enter the home, he's already sitting at the table. Wouldn't that be way more effective? You're like, whoa.
What the hell? Yeah.
We would be questioning how he survived, as opposed to, wow, this is really dumb. We would be questioning how he survived rather than questioning how stupid it is.
Yeah. And this goes into like what I feel is like, just like what you mentioned before, is like the writer and the director not understanding the genre that they're in.
I think that's the problem with this movie, right? Mm-hmm. They don't really understand the genre that it's supposed to be.
They just know the superficial.
Yes. As a Western, I think it functions just fine. And it's on par with many of the other low-budget Westerns that we've been talking about of late.
Oh, yeah.
But as a horror film, it completely fails in almost every single way. David, even the situations that are horrific, which maybe it's just a situation that is allegedly horrific, how the thieves scheme essentially is designed so that they can rob people unexpectedly. It feels like just an excuse to be brutal to women, meaning from a directing and writing side, because it doesn't even make logical sense. Why would a group of people that are fully armed, 12 deep, have to kidnap a girl in order to
set up a trap,
in order to confuse a random wagon by itself? Not the actual stereotypical Oregon Trail look where you have a caravan of wagons. Singular wagons are being held up, robbed from, and the people being killed.
Yes.
And you're telling me that 12 people can't do that without kidnapping a girl, hurting her, and then using her as bait?
Yes.
It is stupid.
It because that's the thing, is
it's
like
stupid logic.
It feels like this was someone's attempt at trying to make the gang brutal, to make the gang feel like they were the people from the Hills Have Eyes.
Yes, you said it earlier. Yes.
Yeah, where they felt like, oh, we're gonna make this gang feel like they are so brutal because they're willing to do this.
Well, David, I thought we were going to be watching something similar to, like, you say The Hills Have Eyes. I figured, okay, if this is grounded, well, The Hills Have Eyes is kind of grounded, but grounded. that's radiation, right?
Yes.
I always forget all those horror films. It's been years. But what was I saying?
You were mentioning about how I was comparing it to The Hills Have Eyes. The gang.
I was expecting something more like Spit on Your Grave.
Yes.
Even that would have worked better as a horror, because you have a group, not one or two, because even the group of thieves, there were two. There was one who was just an asshole, like just a jerk, misogynistic, abusive asshole.
Yeah.
Maybe not murderous towards women, abusive, but not murderous, maybe not even a sociopath, just kind of a shit dude.
Yeah, just kind of a dickhead.
Yeah. Then you had one psychopath. The rest of them were just regular
guys.
Yeah. Like, this is what you're selling as a horror?
Yeah, and that
none of it worked, David. It really did. And I am starting to hate this movie more as we talk about it. And that hasn't happened in a long time. Usually it's the opposite. We start to like something more as we talk about it. Whereas this, I'm getting more frustrated.
Well, because we could see that the movie itself, the one thing that I will say is, like, the movie had potential. You had...
Is that why I'm getting so passionate here?
Yeah, because you had the elements that could make a very good story.
It was pretty.
It was pretty. The cinematography was done well. You had a really... the cast themselves did their job.
The cast wasn't even the problem. That's why I'm saying the acting was good.
Your
weakness
is
the directing and the script.
Yeah, directing and the script. And you can easily... I hate saying this, but, like, when it comes to something like that, projects like that frustrate me more because, like, when you have problems in the script, you can fix that. You can do that. That's why we have rewrites. That's why.
What?
That's why we have, like,
what's
multiple. You know, you have multiple rewrites of a script because at the end of the day, something might not mesh, and you like go, oh, we got to rewrite something quick. Do a rewrite. Here's a new script for the cast the following day.
Yeah.
That is that's what should happen. And it feels like here you didn't get that. What you got was a script. What it feels like is like the writer had their story in their hands, and then someone, like, maybe up top told them, we need this to be added into your story. And they're like, well, okay, if I just do this, and shove that in there, it'll be fine. and it doesn't work.
Yeah. So this was an independently produced film, but it was distributed by Paramount Pictures.
And I could honestly see Paramount, someone in Paramount coming back to them saying, if you want us to distribute your film, you have to give us something here in your story. So
David, Paramount Pictures released a trailer the day before the release of Oregon Trail. The day before. The film was given a limited release in theaters, opening on April 14th, 2023.
Good
and
for them.
It was released to video on demand about a month later, May 12th. The idea for Oregon Trail occurred when screenwriter Meg Turner made a spelling error while searching for the Oregon Trail game online.
So it was supposed to be based on the game?
Finding the title intriguing and funny, Turner began brainstorming. They described the basic concept as, what if Quentin Tarantino wrote The Little House on the Prairie? I don't see that.
I don't... I honestly don't see that.
Or you could say, what if Quentin Tarantino directed a horror Western? I mean, that would make more sense than saying, what if Tarantino wrote The Little House on the Prairie?
And I'd automatically feel, do they know what a Quentin Tarantino film is?
Do they know what The Little House on the Prairie is?
Do they know what Little House on the Prairie is?
Do they know what a horror film is? These are the questions.
These are questions, Mike, that basically come into our brain.
Forget the 2024 election season. These are the hard-hitting questions that must be answered. So, Dave, without being a troll, I don't feel like we have been during this discussion. I feel like we actually were incredibly fair. I'm going to offer my final thoughts, Dave, in a few different ways, okay? So, as a Western film, I believe this film would be interesting to Western buffs to a degree. If you are a Western fan and you just want to watch a low-budget Western, you would probably be okay with watching this on a Friday night. If you were a horror fan looking for horror, you probably should skip this.
Pass.
This is just not a horror film.
Yeah.
It really is not a horror film. There are a lot of mistakes that were made And typically, I only review movies on what's controllable, meaning the story. But with a film like this, I feel like there's so much beyond the controllable as well as the controllable that just made this movie far more messy than it actually needed to be. So I'm going to give this movie a 56% on the R&B score. And that might be surprising, Dave, to some people because I just gave the last Western we reviewed, The Pale Door, which is actually far lower budget than this film is.
Yeah.
I gave it a higher score, but it goes to show you that's not about the money.
It's about them understanding
what they're doing.
Yeah. And that kind of follows into my final thoughts about the film is kind of like when we cover The Pale Door, we can understand that the filmmakers and everyone had a game plan.
Yeah.
There was a set game plan and they stuck to the game plan.
And they had a handle on the Weird West genre.
And they had a handle on their genre. They understood they understood their lanes.
There you go.
And here it's like you have a really good cast. I'm not going to say a really, really good cast. You had a good cast. And you had
better than most low budget films.
Visually, you had a really good cinematographer behind the lens.
Mm-hmm.
Your weakness is the directing and the writing, the script and the directing. And that to me is a shame. It really is a shame because then that leads into the point where, you don't, the people, the brain of the production don't know what they're doing. And they don't understand what the game plan is. And they decide, we're going to try avant-garde things and try to, break the rules, set new rules for us filmmakers. And not truly understand that as filmmakers, our job is to bend the rules, not break them, bend them. And here it's basically like, I agree with you. If you were to look at this as a Western, if I basically went to a Western fan and say, hey, do you want to see a borderline brutal Western, shot really well, cast is well done, and it's just a Western. Think of it as just a Western. I think it'd be really adequate. It probably, in my Rayman score, I was like thinking into probably close to like a 68, 67 range as a Western.
Yeah.
As a horror, it utterly fails me because I went into this looking at it as a horror film, and you have within the genre, you have some really great, trendsetters. You have Bone Tomahawk. Pale Door did a good job, and many others. Brimstone is actually one. There's also another one that basically eludes my brain right now that I just saw, but like here, it feels like they just wanted to jump onto the train as soon as possible of the horror/Western genre. Mm-hmm. And you utterly failed because as a horror fan, I was bored. Mike.
So what's your score?
As I said, as a Western, it's a 67, but because of your failure as a horror film, you dropped to about like a 53.
Yeah. And listen, David, we're both way more charitable than most people. If you go to Rotten Tomato, the fan score is sitting at a 38%. Oh, yeah. And are they fucking relentless?
Because if
don't fuck with horror fans.
If you'd asked me as a horror fan, what score does this film get as a horror film? It gets a 28.
Jeez.
To me, because it's not a horror film.
It really isn't.
There's nothing that sticks to me that is brutal. There's nothing that basically sticks to me that basically says, "Oh yeah, that was a scary moment in film history."
Yeah. It's a shame. I like to champion films even when they're low budget, schlocky films. Like I usually tend to find something enjoyable in movies because I just love film in general, but this movie was a struggle.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was. We were on a roll, David, talking about movies that we've been liking, so it was only a matter of time, right? It was the odds. The odds were against us.
The odds were against us.
The laws of averages, right? All right. I want to thank everybody for listening. Be sure to go to Apple Podcasts and give us a thumbs up and a rating and a review. We need them. If you want us to keep doing shows more regularly, then we need those. So please do so.